Remember back in January of 2020 when everyone was claiming that TemTem would be the Pokemon killer after the ho-hum release of Sword and Shield in late 2019? After years of series fatigue, Sword and Shield decided to take steps backward after Sun and Moon pushed the series forward in new directions, and fans made it clear that they had had enough. Truly, it was the perfect time for a game like TemTem to release. This Pokemon competitor, developed by European studio Crema, caught YouTube by storm for a few weeks, as it was covered by many reviewers who claimed it to be a breath of fresh air for the creature capture genre. And you know what? They were right at that time. Unfortunately for TemTem, a worldwide pandemic would see a slowing of development, forcing the team to pull back their ambitious roadmap to a 1.0 release. Dedicated fans stuck with the title, and along with the release of a few big updates and console versions, the game has hung on. But much of the talk has evaporated leading up to the full release of the title, and now it's out, and it seems like nobody is talking about it. TemTem's moment in the spotlight has come and gone, especially with how Pokemon has found ways to reinvent itself in 2022 after a disastrous showing in 2021. But despite the shifting of attention, does TemTem still deserve your time and money? Well, in some ways yes, and in others no. It's a game with a really hot start, easily luring in anyone fatigued by Pokemon's recent stagnation, but it really fails to hold that momentum as your adventure unfolds. So join me in exploring the Airborne Archipelago as I review TemTem. And before we dive in too far, let me make note that this is a review of the game's main campaign. I won't be looking into the endgame content or much of the online experience for the purposes of this video. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's press on. Right out of the gate, it's important to acknowledge just how much TemTem draws inspiration from the Pokemon series. We have a creature capture game where you journey through a new region, catching and raising monsters called TemTem while battling trainers and dojo leaders, while also attempting to thwart the plans of an evil organization. Sound familiar? Yeah. Because of this, many comparisons to the top dog in this genre are warranted and will be referenced throughout this review. With that being said though, the team at Crema wanted to do more than just make their own version of Pokemon. A cursory glance at the game's Twitter account reveals the pillars that inform but also differentiate this title from its bigger brother. Their goal was to make a cross-play and cross-progression MMO creature capture game that not only took you on the standard adventure, but also introduced social elements, such as a co-op mode, tons of clans, customization, and more, while also offering up a new take on Pokemon's turn-based combat. It's a lot, and in a word, it's ambitious. How many times have you heard fans of the Pokemon series idolize an imaginary game where they not only experience the single-player adventure, but also could battle against friends or strangers at any time in a shared world? I know I've felt that way, and TemTem looks to deliver that. So with this overview in mind, let's dive in and see how well the studio handled these lofty goals. Pokemon games typically lure people in for a multitude of reasons. For some, it's the sense of adventure. For others, it's about catching all the Pokemon and raising lovable companions. Then of course, there's trainers who want to be the best by raising competitive teams. In short, there's a lot of reasons to love these games. For me, one of the most overlooked features is the world building, and so that's what I'd like to start this analysis off with. A look at the Airborne Archipelago, the region of TemTem. This makes for a good starting point because I want to highlight the strengths of the title first before going in to what holds it back. The world of TemTem is comprised of a series of islands, all with their own unique sense of identity in terms of color palette, culture, and to a lesser extent, geography. Consider the first island you visit, Denise. You'll start in the southwestern town of Zadar. It's the day of your apprentice's eve, meaning you'll soon be gifted a TemTem and a chance to explore every island of the archipelago. As you start your journey, you'll travel north through grasslands, small towns, and massive cliffsides before reaching the city of Arisola, where your first dojo master, akin to gym leaders, awaits you. Neatly enough, many of the game's routes aren't called routes at all, as instead they have their own geographical identity. For example, these cliffs aren't called Route 2, they're called the Thalasian Cliffs. And this isn't Route 3, it's the Gifted Bridges, a series of walkways constructed as a present to Denise from the citizens of Amnesia, which is another island. This helps build a sense of history, place, and purpose within the world. Eventually, you'll earn a surfboard that grants you access to the mighty Solara River. This giant waterway is one half of Denise's identity, with the other half being the massive and windy cliffsides defining its northern points. The sea and the air define this coastal island, and in many ways this informs the types of creatures that you can find here. Wind and water TemTem make up the bulk of creatures you'll encounter, but enough other types are included to ensure you'll have a well-balanced team at the start. Pokemon has often done something of a similar vein, keeping bug Pokemon to forests or having fire Pokemon near volcanoes. Here though, it's taken a step further. TemTem is unapologetic about overloading the player with certain types on each island as to not compromise on their world building, and I love that. Like I mentioned, the balance is still there, but they will load you up on TemTem that reflect the island's nature. This same level of detail can be found across the other islands as well. Tukma is a swampy and poisonous wasteland full of toxic type TemTem, but venturing deep underground to escape the noxious fumes reveals a massive city supported by its mining operation where many crystal type TemTem can be found. And that's right, TemTem does introduce new types such as crystal and digital. Meanwhile, Amnesia, also called the Mir Isles, was once all unified, but the mighty Anak volcano of this island erupts frequently, causing the destruction of land and the creation of more. Lots of bridge work is used to help tie the floating chunks of island together, creating 3 distinct levels for the player to explore. So hopefully you can start to see that many of the game's islands are defined in part by their geography. With that being said, repetitive level design does cut into the authenticity of each island, as sometimes route layouts feel eerily similar to others. And that's what weakens the world's geographical believability, as sometimes you can feel the designer's hands at work. More impressive than the geography though is the culture of the people inhabiting these islands. There's been a lot of work put into the background details of the airborne archipelago, and if this world enthralls you, there's plenty to uncover through chatting with NPCs and completing certain quest lines. Of course, you'll get a healthy dose of that world building within the main story. The people of each island have their own dynamic. On Denise, the level of aristocracy rises as you move further north, from the working class town of Zadar to the Academia of Brickle Del Mar, to the luxurious Arisola. And for a taste of the relaxing beach life, the city of Turquesa will delight. The people living in each town reflects the tone of the city that they come from. Meanwhile, on the island of Kisawa, tradition is at the forefront. Based on a sub-Saharan African culture, these citizens pride themselves on tradition and strength. And then there's Simpanku. The divide here comes between technology versus tradition. The old monks in the highlands maintain rituals and live simple lives, while down below, in Neo-Edo, the people embrace technology and the future. And this divide between the people is also reflected in the gameplay, through the inclusion of digital type TemTem, creatures invented in Nanto Labs who now assimilate into the wild for you to capture. And you get that clash where the natural lands are being invaded by those digital TemTem, and that really represents the main issue dividing the people of Simpanku. It's brilliant. And then on Arbory, you find more people at odds. The cities of Lockburg and Properton are constantly at each other's throats in a bout for civilized superiority. This is symbolized mostly through their dojo leaders and their preferred types. Lockburg specializes in fighting types, while Properton is more fond of mental type TemTem. Each island has its own vibe in this regard, and it makes for some interesting places to explore. Of course, it goes beyond that too, as there's plenty of individual characters and NPCs who aren't necessarily memorable, but not in a bad way. Many towny NPCs further your understanding of the world, and not just in terms of humanity's relationship with TemTem. Sure, that exists. Plenty of folks will share their fondness for their creatures, and there's even a group dedicated to freeing TemTem and doing away with the capturing and battling. On the other hand though, there's plenty of people who are passionate about other facets of life, such as acting, cooking, politics, environmentalism, or hobbies like collecting comics. Unlike in Pokemon, not every human in this world is obsessed with the creatures. They are but just one part of a bigger world. Important to our journey, but not to everyone. And to me, this helps create a more diverse and well-realized world. It isn't all serious all the time, by the way, as Crema was not afraid to reference both our real world and the world of Pokemon games. Funniest of all are Easter eggs, such as NPCs saying that they used to be a TemTem tamer till they took an arrow to the knee, or this guy who claims that he saw a super rare TemTem hiding underneath a truck located on the port of the Solaro River. And if you don't get that reference, I guess I'm just old, but I have faith you will. Meanwhile, some folks will hilariously comment on how it's strange for you to just walk into their home without invitation. My absolute favorite though would be the trainers who stand near the entrance to new routes, and sometimes you'll talk to them and they'll comment on how they can't stop you from proceeding down the route, as there's no such thing as route police. After how often characters impede your freedom in Sword and Shield, this truly made me laugh out loud. I love that. So all in all, it's clear Crema has spent a lot of time thinking about the world they wanted to design, both in terms of its history and culture, as well as its geography. There's a lot of dialogue in this game, perhaps a bit too much for some, but if you love world building like I do, there's plenty to appreciate here. I know it's not really the most pertinent thing to start a review with, talking about the world building, especially when that's not the main focus of the game, but truly, world building is one of TemTem's greatest strengths, and I wanted to make sure I made that clear. Let's dive into the main crux of the game now, capturing and battling TemTem as you journey through the islands, defeating the dojo leaders and stopping the evil organization. You're going to spend a lot of time in tall grass as you journey through the archipelago. Catching TemTem is very akin to the process of catching Pokemon. Whittle down their health, and then throw a capture card in hopes of making them your new partner. One quality of life improvement here is that TemTem isn't afraid to show you the mechanical side of your Pokemon immediately. Upon capture, you'll not only see your creature's type and ability, but also its TVs and SVs, which are equivalent to IVs and EVs in Pokemon. If you're not satisfied, you're welcome to release the creature right then and there. This is a nice quality of life improvement over Pokemon, but it's unfortunately just one of few, as we will come to see. What's more important to discuss here though is TemTem's changes to the battle mechanics of traditional Pokemon games. The most immediate difference is that TemTem features predominantly double battles instead of head-to-head matches like in Pokemon. There's a reason that officially sanctioned Pokemon tournaments primarily use the 2-on-2 format, and that's because it simply doubles the possibilities, creating more strategy in the process. It doubles the move pool a player can use at any time, as well as forcing a player to consider type matchups against opponents, but also how the two creatures you use synergize together. The mainline campaigns of Pokemon titles don't use this setup, however, making the change feel extremely fresh to newcomers here in TemTem. And that alone helps this title to distinguish itself from its inspirer. You add on the additional strategy it provides, and it's a formula for success. However, the changes don't stop there. TemTem moves, called techniques, don't use PP or power points like in Pokemon games, as instead each creature has their own stamina bar. Each move requires stamina. The more powerful the attack, the more it costs. Some moves also have locks on them that don't open until a certain number of rounds in battle pass by. Meanwhile, if a TemTem runs out of stamina, it will become overexerted, taking damage relative to the insufficient amount of stamina you had left versus how much the move required. Overexertion also leaves them unable to move for a turn. So, for example, say you had 15 stamina left, and you use a 16-point move. You'll take a small chunk of damage. Meanwhile, if you have 15 stamina left, and you use a 33-point move, you're gonna take a lot. Stamina is another stat that's built directly into a TemTem's base stats, just like speed, HP, attack, special defense, or what have you. So, these are some of the major changes. Let's see how they play out in battle. Well, the primary mission these changes accomplish is getting tamers to constantly switch up their party. Without using an item, TemTem recovers stamina slowly, even if you gain extra by having them do nothing for a turn. This encourages players to switch out once the stamina is depleted, in order to continue their barrage with a different creature. This gets more TemTem involved in each battle and prevents trainers from over-leveling a single creature to sweep through everyone with. And since stamina fully replenishes at the end of each battle, it won't hold you back from facing your next opponent. This simple switch gets more creatures involved while also making you strategize even more. Do you go for a final blow by unleashing your high-powered move at the cost of some health, or do you continue with lighter attacks that don't penalize you? The choice is yours. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of other smaller changes that also contribute something a little bit different to this battle system versus that of Pokemon's. For example, some techniques have plus marks next to them, meaning if you use that move alongside a TemTem whose type is shared with that move, it'll add an extra modifier, such as more damage, a status condition, or trapping the creature in battle. The most common one I used would be Platimus's move called Tsunami. Now, normally, this is just a water move that hits both of the opposing trainer's TemTem. However, if Platimus has a wind-type TemTem alongside of him, it'll add this kind of freezing effect to the move, meaning that Tsunami not only damages with water-type damage, but it also adds a freezing effect, slowing the opponents for a few turns. These moves with extra effects are called synergies, and they're really fun to pull off. There's also no random elements to battles, such as misses, critical hits, or an affection system that keeps you alive because your TemTem loves you. To me, this is sort of nice, as it takes the guesswork and bullshit moments out of battle, which shifts the outcome of each battle. Success or failure comes on your shoulders and your shoulders only. There's also just a much faster flow to battle due to how additional information is handled. In Pokemon, players are forced to sit through so many dialogue boxes in battle about, hey, your Pokemon's special attack rose, and then, oh, it's raining, and then, oh yeah, you took damage from Toxic, and yes, health was then restored through leftovers. It's a barrage at times. That's not the case in TemTem at all. Status ailment effects are applied simultaneously across all active and inactive TemTem instead of individually. Experience and leveling is all boosted at once as well, which cuts out wasted time. It just makes the battles faster, and that's always nice. And coolly enough, if a Pokemon levels up in battle, it can evolve right then and there, mid-fight, which is super cool and reminds me a ton of the Pokemon anime. And speaking of evolution, TemTem don't evolve at certain levels, but instead after a set number of gained levels. For example, I chose Smazzy as my starter. It was level 5. It evolved at level 34, but not because that's its pre-selected evolution level, but instead because it leveled up 29 times. So if I hatched a level 1 Smazzy, it would evolve at level 30. This is a smart inclusion, as it always feels weird in Pokemon games to catch a higher level Pokemon and then have it evolve after a single experience bar. It ran counterintuitive to the soul and purpose of being a trainer, to grow alongside of your Pokemon and to get stronger with time, not after 5 seconds. So yeah, I like how evolution is handled in TemTem. Back to battling though, and the final major thing we need to discuss is difficulty. For years, Pokemon fans, myself included, have clamored for different difficulty modes within the games to no avail. I'm somewhat happy to report that TemTem is a more challenging experience than newer Pokemon titles, in part because opposing trainers aren't completely brain dead. They will target weaknesses more often, but this alone is not overly crippling, as super effective moves aren't always the one-hit KOs they are in Pokemon. 4x super effective moves can still prove to be lethal, but outside of this, it's extremely difficult to one-shot anything in TemTem unless there's a severe level imbalance. This forces you to use your brain more often, as you can't spam super effective hits to win. Instead, you want to utilize them to outlast your opponent, while also considering how hard their creatures can hit yours. It makes battles more attention-grabbing, which is a major plus in my eyes. Now, this might all be sounding quite good, and to be honest, most of it is in the vacuum of a single battle. However, Crema made some critical mistakes that take some of this difficulty to the realm of tedium, and it really drags down the experience. The main issue here is that while each battle can provide a lot of choice, depth, and engagement, it can also be extremely taxing on your resources. Constantly swapping out TemTem and being unable to one-shot things means your creatures will also eat a ton of damage and also faint quite a bit. This wouldn't be too much of a problem if not for the fact that victories don't reward you with a ton of currency, meaning you won't be able to buy enough health items to offset the damage you took. So you either press on and risk losing with a weakened team, or take a time loss to go back to the last healing station. And routes are also jam-packed with trainers, meaning after each battle, it might be necessary to go back and heal up. That leads to a ton of backtracking, which is tedious, repetitive, and boring. Sure, there are items that can speed things up a tad, but they still involve runbacks to and from the end of each battle. It's not too bad in the early game, but it is particularly annoying on the last few islands, considering many trainers have TemTem that can be higher level than what you currently have, leading to more damage and more treks back. It seems to me this tedium was built directly into the game to stave off hungry players from eating up all the content too quickly, but this was not the way to go about doing that. It makes players want to stop playing when they feel the sense of progression is neutered by constant backtracking. The journey is core to the experience, and the journeys suck when they involve taking 2 steps back for every step forward. And what really stuns me is that the solution is so simple. All you have to do is provide the player with an adequate amount of money upon each victory to purchase a plentiful amount of healing items. This one change alone would fix the issue for me, because then, you know what, you still have the difficulty of the battles, but the consequences of those battles don't carry over to the next. But alas, it just isn't that way. Even after Crema took steps to increase how much money you earn, it's still bad. and TemTem is tedious because of it. One thing about TemTem that surprised me was in how heavily it emphasized its story, as it's just as much a feature of this title as is the battling. Unfortunately, the whole adventure ends up feeling quite bloated by the end. The tale kicks off simple enough with you starting out on your adventure, where you'll choose a starter TemTem and attempt to learn the art of battle by training alongside of the dojo masters. On your home island of Denise, Sophia rules the roost, but in your attempts to learn from her, you come to find out she's gone missing. This leads you to an old battered fort where she's been captured by a group called Clan Belsoto. This generic group of baddies will prove to play a much bigger role than you might anticipate going into the game. That's because as you travel from island to island, you'll incrementally become more involved in thwarting their dastardly plan to seize control of the archipelago. This plotline becomes quite literally the entire focus of the story from the 4th island onward, as your journey to train with the masters takes a complete backseat. Sure, you'll still battle them, but it's mostly to prove your strength for the battles to come. Your primary focus will be on learning more about the Belsoto's plans and putting a stop to it. And quite honestly, the longer it goes on, the more dull it becomes. And unfortunately, the longer it goes on, the more you get involved in it. There's tons of dialogue sections that seem to go on forever. Perhaps these words would carry meaning if Clan Belsoto was interesting, but honestly, they just aren't. Both the leaders of the clan, as well as your allies, feel incredibly generic and one-note, without much character development. It's a boring plot about saving the world that just goes on and on and on and on. This, paired with how long it can take to clear out routes, makes for a boring, grinded out experience that fails to engage as time goes on. The final 3 islands of the game feel like drawn out story sections that are separated by long, backtrack-filled portions of gameplay against tons and tons of trainers. To be fair, they try to keep the plot in mind, as often the trainers who stand in your way will comment on recent Belsoto activity, but it just isn't enough to keep the player hooked. And I think the lack of voice acting was also a major factor in that. Now, to be fair, there are some interesting plot points that I won't spoil here. These minimal twists and new directions help to differentiate this story from ones you might find in a Pokemon game. But during the back half, it just loses its momentum, as it feels like you're being served up the same battles and plot beats repeatedly without much progress towards resolution. Now, in terms of side stories, well, there isn't much substance to these either. There is a litany of side quests for you to complete in TemTem, but doing just a few will quickly reveal their true nature. They are fetch quests with a splash of window dressing and not much more. You aren't going to go on cool adventures or meet interesting characters while completing these. Far more likely is you'll be told to go somewhere, talk to someone or find an item, and then return to the quest giver for a small reward. There's very little guidance for these quests as well, meaning it's hard to just grind them out. I can't really recommend engaging with them at all. And so overall, the story here, it starts off decent, it gets you invested, and then it just tanks, and it was not good at all. So, all of this, the good and the bad, takes place in an MMO world, and Crema cited the online features as a major marketing point behind this game. Therefore, it is important to discuss these features too. Unfortunately, it's not something I can speak of too much, as within the confines of the campaign, there's very little reason to engage with other players. Now, it is of course fun to see other trainers on the same adventure as you, especially when they have a TemTem with them that you don't recognize. Interacting with it will add it to your Tempedia, but most of its information will remain obscured until you catch it. Beyond this though, there's very little incentive for players to stop progressing the main story to have a casual battle with another random player. Throughout my journey, I took time to challenge other players whose TemTem seemed to be around the same stage as mine, and I challenged them to battles. Not once did anyone accept my challenge, and honestly, it's hard to see why anyone would want to until they finish the main campaign and built competitive teams. It would be nice if the game rewarded players for engaging in battles like this, perhaps throw extra currency their way. In order to not break the in-game economy, say, you can throw players 1,000 pansuns, which is the in-game money, 3 times a day for engaging with a battle with another trainer. This would help alleviate the money strain felt throughout the game, while also encouraging players to interact with one another instead of just existing in the same space. As it is now, there's no reason to talk to a single other person while working on the campaign, and I think that's a huge misstep. MMOs survive in part because of the interactions and friendships that come through playing with others, but if you don't incentivize players to try out those social features, that ball never gets rolling. And it's a real shame, because I always wanted a game like this, and then I try to challenge another player, and they can't be bothered. And honestly, why should they? The game doesn't reward them. Now, again, this is mostly a review of the main campaign, so I can't speak on how prominent the social features are used in the endgame. I imagine they are utilized more, considering players will be looking to build competitive teams, which can require trade partners to get new TemTem, and of course other players to battle against in ranked play. Perhaps there's more communication there, but in campaign play, you won't find much of it at all. Looking ahead to the post-game, players can expect a deluge of content to engage with, so long as they remain dedicated to the game. I can't speak to their quality, but there's weekly raids, clan wars to fight over territory, rematches against the dojo leaders, houses to design, and of course, the competitive play I just mentioned alongside of completing your Tempedia. It's certainly enough to keep the average person busy, but I imagine many folks won't make it to that point in the game due to the tedium. There is another island being released for challenging battles akin to the Battle Frontier in Pokemon games, so that's another thing to look forward to. The other thing players can do after completing the main story is purchasing a premium battle pass and grinding that out for cosmetic rewards. This is going to be upsetting for some players who believe in-game purchases shouldn't be included in a title that isn't free to play. I can understand that dissatisfaction, but I can sympathize with Crema as they must find recurring revenue somewhere to keep servers online. It's not something that personally bothers me a ton, but it's something to be wary of if you're thinking about this game for the long haul or if you can't stand battle passes in games. Anyway, that hopefully gives you a little bit of an overview of what to expect from the MMO side of this MMORPG. The most important presentational element in any game trying to compete with Pokemon is going to be the creature design. It's important for developers to harness their own style while also capturing that perfect blend of cute and tough that Pokemon is known for. In the case of TemTem, I'm going to give them a passing grade, as the monsters feel cohesive with one another while also having elements that make them feel unique, at least for the most part. If you want some cute TemTem, look no farther than Saku, a nature-type TemTem, or Chromion, a digital-type TemTem, or Ukama, a water-type TemTem. For something a bit more badass looking, you can opt to use Mastion, a fire and water type TemTem, or Usakai, an earth and melee type TemTem, or one of my favorites, Goliath, a crystal and melee TemTem. There's also some weird ones for players looking outside of the traditional humanoid or four-legged animal variety. Consider Guldur, a toxic type TemTem, Obi-10, a digital and electric type TemTem, or Babawa, a water and nature TemTem. You can also expect to find a few homages and inspiration from the original 151 Pokemon. For example, there's Mimit, who acts like Ditto, or Hocus and Pocus, whose name is clearly inspired by Abra, Kadabra, and Alakazam. Hopefully, from these examples, you can see the variety throughout the designs. There's plenty to choose from, as there's currently 164 known TemTem. And just to show you a few extra, some of my personal favorite designs are Platypet, Chimorion, Acronox, Babong, and Aoi. Now, the one criticism that can be lobbied at the creature design is how many of them are four-legged animals with very similar designs and heights. Amphitheater, Mouflank, Capiri, Momo, Karin, Cernif, and Valiar all look similar structurally, with only a few details and color choices differing them. Considering most of these have pre-evolutions, it just resulted in a sizable chunk of the Tempedia looking uninspired compared to some of the better designs. Of course, every batch of creatures is going to have stronger and weaker designs, so this issue is forgivable despite the disappointment. As for the rest of the visuals in the game, we have a bit of a mixed bag. I'd say environmental details including natural landscapes as well as cities look good and mesh well with one another to create a cohesively stylistic world. However, the human character models leave a lot to be desired, with many of them looking like cartoon characters that could have been found on stock images. Within the world, as well as in dialogue sections, they come off as pretty lifeless and cheap, despite the game's attempts to liven them up with simple facial animations and poses. And considering how often you engage with dialogue and the emphasis on the story, it would have been nice to make these characters look a lot better. In terms of the game's soundtrack, we have a good one. The battle themes are full of life and energy, especially that Dojo Master theme. That one in particular goes really hard. I also enjoyed the sereneness of the Tempedia Center's theme. It was always calming as I restored my TemTem back to full health. I must also give a shout out to the overworld theme of Denise, as the powerful strings really struck me and elevated the sense of adventure that I was about to go on. Every song was appropriate thematically for the environment they were being experienced in, and that's always good. And finally, I'm happy to report that there were no major bugs or glitches while playing through TemTem. The only thing to note here is that sometimes the loading screens are a bit longer than you'd hope for, but nothing insufferable or journey stopping. So yes, for as much as I wanted this game to succeed, I can't deny that ultimately TemTem fails in being the David to Pokemon's Goliath. It's a game that starts off hot, but just can't maintain the momentum. There's certainly room for a niche audience to really love this title, and that passion will endure through the main campaign straight into the endgame content. For me though, TemTem has too many problems, and it's come out too late. If this had been a 2021 game, it might get more of a pass from me, considering how dead on arrival the Sinnoh remakes were. But now, we live in a world where Pokemon seems to be getting their shit together. Legends Arceus was a breath of fresh air, and Scarlet and Violet are the most excited I've been for a Pokemon game since X and Y, and maybe ever. I am hyped for them. TemTem had its moment to break in, but they failed to seize it, partially because of the pandemic, but also because of their choices in game design. Of course, even if the title had come out in 2021, many of these issues would still be apparent. In some ways, they've given Pokemon detractors what they've asked for: more difficulty, more content, and a refreshing battle system, while also delivering on a dream Pokemon fans have had for years: being a trainer in a huge world alongside their friends. Still, despite all of this, Crema failed in delivering quality of life elements that would have really made this game a success and helped to avoid the tedium. Whether this was done intentionally to slow down player progression or through bad decision making isn't known, but either way, it's a major problem. Now, in some ways, I do sympathize with Crema on this issue. Recently, I enjoyed watching through Never Knows Best's brief two-part series on MMOs, in which he details how one large-scale problem with MMOs is the players themselves. In particular, the ferocity at which they can consume content, while remaining hungry for more. Maybe that's why Crema made TemTem so grindy, to buy time for future content development and keep players in-game. Regardless, it's a tough position to be in. But for the casual player like myself, it got to the point where I just was walking into a wall over and over and over again. The fun disappeared as progression slowly crawled to a halt, and it's for that reason that I can't fully recommend TemTem to just anyone. If the grindy nature doesn't sound like an issue to you, by all means play this game, you'll love it. The new take on creature battling cuts out a lot of randomness of fights while rewarding strategic thought and careful planning. The world is well realized and full of lore to uncover, and there's plenty to keep you busy if you don't mind the grind. And even if you aren't a fan of all that, you can still find fun in TemTem. It just might not be enough fun to carry you through all the way to the game's ending. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, that wraps up my review of TemTem. I wanted to take a moment to apologize. This video is definitely later than I wanted it to be, but I was super busy. I also got sick for like a week and a half and could barely talk, so that really, put back production, because if I can't record audio, what do you want the video to sound like this? Hi guys, let's review TemTem. I couldn't be doing that. So the good news is I appreciate your patience, and there's more videos to come because I'm better now. So yeah, that's about it. If you are a fan of creature capture games, you're gonna find a ton of Pokemon content on this channel, by the way, if you're new, so check that out. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and join our Discord. The link is below. And as always, have a nice day and take care.